Welcome to the Fantasy Football Show here on Sporting News, and we continue our preseason coverage with a look at everyone's favorite time waster, mock drafts. I don't know if people participate in mock drafts fully anymore. You just bounce in for a few rounds, bounce out, or if you do what we did, and we're about to talk about, you use FantasyPros Mock Draft Simulator to just rip off a mock draft in minutes. Vinny, we ran a full simulation. We didn't input at all. This is all no human emotion here. This is all artificial intelligence. And we're going to break it down and look at the results that were spit out real quick. It's a half-point PPR league. Starts 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, a standard flex, a defense, a kicker. Against my better judgment, we left kicker in there since most of you still play with kickers. And we'll look at the results here. We got it up on the screen, and you can see the first round, Vinny. What do you think? Best pick, worst pick of the first round?
Well, I've been talking about this quite a bit with the worst pick. We'll start with the negative and go to the positive here. But Christian McCaffrey at number 2 overall, that's where he's ranked in a lot of industry rankings at this point, and Fantasy Pros collects the consensus expert ranking. So everyone's trying to get that season out of him. I get why, because when he's on the field, he operates like a RB1 elite player in half point and full point. He's just an absolute god because he's going to get all those passes thrown to him short. So that's great in theory, but this guy hasn't been healthy for 3 years now, and these are cumulative injuries. These are things that are going to affect him going forward. It's very frustrating if you've had him on your team the past couple years, and it's just hard with that first pick that high, number 2 overall, to take such a risk early. And I just don't see it. While at the same time, you have Nadre Harris there buried in the first round, going 8th overall. This guy got massive volume for the Steelers last year. He averaged 3.9 yards per carry. There wasn't much help there. He didn't score touchdowns, and he still finished there as an RB4 in half point. So I don't know. I don't get it. Maybe people are scared of the quarterback situation, but that would say that Harris is going to get a lot more love here. And I like the young, fresh legs. Jonathan Taylor represents that at number 1 overall. So why wouldn't you want Najee Harris not far behind him in your draft?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's bizarre that Najee Harris isn't considered the consensus 2 or 3, especially in a league that has PPR at all, even half point. You worry about the offensive line. Well, it wasn't good last year. You worry about the quarterback. Quarterback wasn't good last year. I know they have other weapons at receiver and tight end, but he's still the focal point of that offense. He's the guy that I would target much higher. I agree with you on Christian McCaffrey. I even think Austin Eckler is a bit of a risk. I just don't see him scoring as many touchdowns again. He has a little bit of an injury history too. You got to draft someone there. Though McCaffrey and Eckler are still going to go high. They're probably still going to go top 5. I like Henry a little bit more than them, even in PPR. But that's just me. But for the most part, I think when you look at the first round, it played out in a fashion that most first rounds are going to play out. The names might be in a different order, but we're going to see Cooper Kupp be the first wide receiver. He'll go around that 5 spot. We'll see Jefferson. We'll see Chase. A lot of the names are the same. The name that stands out to me the most is the guy who went the very last pick of the first round, and that's Travis Kelce. And I'm always intrigued. I'm an avowed take Travis Kelce early or whoever else is that elite tight end in a given year. It changes this year. Mark Andrews seems to be the next guy, if not the number 1 guy. There's a very valid argument. Mark Andrews should go ahead of Travis Kelce. But how does that affect the rest of your team? How does that affect the rest of your draft if you take a tight end in the first round, or because it's always going to be the end of the first round with one of the first picks of the second round? Vinny, let's look at that team and how it broke down to get DeAndre Swift with the next pick. Pretty good running back 1. The wide receiver 1 wound up being Michael Pittman. That's okay. You want someone better, I think, but that's okay. If Travis Kelce's your tight end, you get DJ Moore, that's fine. Allen Robinson, that's good. But then it falls off a little bit with Kareem Hunt being your number 2 running back. But what do you think of that strategy, Vinny? Tight end in the first or second round and how it affects the rest of your team?
Yeah, you have to accept the fact that you're getting a big advantage at one position, tight end. So if your RB2 is weaker because of it, or your wide receiver 3, that's just part of the game. But the one thing you have to think about is your RB2 that much different from a different kind of RB2 you could have gotten, or is your wide receiver 3 helping you more than you think here to bridge that gap? So that's the thing you have to concern yourself with. And that's why you take Travis Kelce that high. Or if you think about Josh Allen or quarterback early, it's because you think you'll have a significant advantage at that position where you can fill in with other guys at different positions. So the one thing I would have maybe thought about earlier, when you have Kelce who operates kind of like a wide receiver one on your team, I might have targeted a running back there in round 4. Because you had Michael Pittman and Travis Kelce and DeAndre Swift. That's a good core group to your team, but now you see this back in this draft, you get Allen Robinson and Rashad Bateman. I don't think you need to do that. Get your wide receiver 4 early. I think you got to tap into some of that running back options that are there in that 4th round. And I think that they didn't do that as well here. So you got to maybe be locked into certain positions. If you get Travis Kelce early, you really have to keep looking at the best running back and wide receiver available. I don't know if they did that enough here. And then you ended up with Kareem Hunt. Who knows what's going to happen with him behind Nick Chubb? So that's something you have to think about, opportunity cost. But player like Kelce, what I'm looking at as well with Kelce and Mark Andrews, these guys are also very durable. They're not going to have the same injury risk as running backs. They're just going to have less volatility in general. And with Travis Kelce, you can argue his value's gone up without Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews without Hollywood Brown here. So keep that in mind. These guys act as wide receiver ones, and you know they're going to have big touchdown totals. So I think it's okay doing that, but you really have to focus the rest of your draft if you go for that singular luxury position early.
Yeah, I think when you look at the situation with the guy or the computer who took Travis Kelce, he probably should have taken. I'm going to keep saying he. I'm going to assign gender to the computer here. Should not have taken Rashad Bateman there. Could have taken a couple other backs who are starters like Josh Jacobs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even Damian Harris. In PPR, he's not as good, but it just makes you feel a little better than taking the number 2 back. But I think you're right that the running back should have probably been selected in the 4th round or the 5th round. If you do that, you have a very solid core to your team, a very solid start, and something you sort of reference. Travis Kelce puts up wide receiver 1 numbers. So what I like to do is I like to say, so imagine if whoever you take it as your wide receiver 3 is actually your tight end. So in this case, if Allen Robinson was your tight end, you'd be over the moon. And that's kind of how you have to think about it. In the case of the person who took, or the computer that took Mark Andrews, I thought that team wound up being more balanced, getting Etienne as the RB2, getting Keenan Allen, Gabriel Davis, Elijah Moore as the 3 starting wide receivers. Of course, that was an advantage there because that team already had Austin Eckler. So that sort of changes the equation. I think in real drafts, Mark Andrews will go earlier in the 2nd round. I think Andrews and Kelce will go very close to each other. So in this case, I think maybe it's a little bit of a misrepresentation of what might actually happen in drafts. But looking more at round 2, we see a lot of running backs, sort of a running back dominant round. What did you think, Vinny, was the best pick and the worst pick of the 2nd round?
Well, the best pick to me is Aaron Jones. I just think he's going to be a huge part of what the Packers do this season. They've got a mess with their wide receiver core. I know everyone's loving Romeo Doubs here, but come on. I mean, they need to lean on the running game more. And that's why you have A.J. Dillon. You look in this draft, he went pretty high here as well in the 6th round. The Packers are going to lean on these backs quite a bit. Aaron Jones can be a monster in the passing game when needed. Aaron Rodgers is going to trust him. I also see some potential from that 2019 first season with Matt LaFleur. Everyone is complaining about Aaron Rodgers not having touchdowns. They all went to Aaron Jones there. So I think Jones can have a big scoring year on top of being more effective as a receiver. So I really like that pick in the middle of the 2nd round. The worst pick to me, it's tough here. I like a lot of them for the most part, but I'm going to say Leonard Fournette. I just am not buying too much into Fournette. The conditioning issues are there. We saw him balloon a little bit, those pictures of him being a little bit out of shape, and he kind of poked fun at that. But the real concern here is Rachaad White, the rookie. He's looked fantastic in camp. He can do everything Fournette can do with fresh legs here. So I think some volatility. And I'm not a fan of the Saquon Barkley pick either, but at least I could see him dominating the touches there with the Giants no matter what. Where Fournette, I think there could be some competition there, even if Fournette is healthy. So that's how I kind of break it down. Love Jones, don't love the Fournette pick as much there.
Yeah, I think in real drafts, I actually think some of those receivers are going to jump in the 2nd round and drop some of the backs down, especially Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans. They're just safer. When you look at Ezekiel Elliott's, everyone seems to be saying Ezekiel Elliott's being overdrafted. Same with Saquon Barkley. You mentioned the risk with Fournette. There's obvious risk with Javonte Williams. Alvin Kamara is still facing a suspension in season, which in some ways is even more dangerous because you don't know when it's going to come down, how it's going to affect you when you need him the most, because it'll happen during bye weeks as opposed to opening the season with a suspension where you have a full complement of players. That second round is just a minefield. So I think a lot of people are gonna go, well, the wide receiver safer. You look at that, the third round, fourth round, fifth round, you see a lot of wide receivers. It's not necessarily the right move, but it's gonna make you feel better. And there are still good backs available. I think the best pick of the round is Mark Andrews, kind of what I alluded to earlier, and I do think he'll go earlier. But going into the third round, this is where we see the quarterbacks come off the board, the first quarterbacks. And I would imagine someone in a lot of 12-team leagues are going to jump Josh Allen in the second round. That always seems to be what happens in a lot of leagues, especially if it's more of a friends and family league, shall we say. But that's fine. We'll look at it third round. Quarterbacks start to go. And let's assess it, Vinny, somewhat like we did with the tight ends. If you're the first person to take a quarterback, if you take Josh Allen, how does that affect the rest of your team? And in this situation, this team got Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, good running backs. They also jumped Darren Waller early, so that affected the wide receiver unit. And first-round pick of Justin Jefferson helps, but you're talking Jerry Jeudy, Treylon Burks, a bunch of other rookies as your next wide receivers. That's a risky strategy. Is it inevitable if you take a quarterback early, or what could have been done different?
Well, I think when you take Allen Mahomes that early, what you worry about is when is Justin Herbert going to go? Or when is Lamar Jackson going to go? And look what happened there in this draft. Jackson and Herbert lasted there till 2 rounds later, more than that. So that means you're not getting the best return on investment. Now, let's look at those teams that passed on the quarterback there in round 3, but took him in round 5. You get A.J. Brown and Cortland Sutton there with those picks, and then you get T. Higgins and Mike Williams. I mean, that's fantastic there to add to getting RB1 and RB2 in the first 2 rounds with those 2 teams. They followed similar patterns here. So is Allen or Mahomes, are they going to score more than Justin Herbert that much to say that the difference at wide receiver is going to be made up? I wouldn't say so. So that's the thing. You kind of have drafter's remorse there if you take the quarterback too early, especially we know in one quarterback start leagues. You have to be a little bit creative, and you got to get the best return on investment. To me, Herbert and Jackson right now are better returns on investment that late versus Alvin Mahomes early. And that's how I kind of look at it. I don't want to get too deep where I get into quarterbacks that I'm not sure about, and then I have to draft multiple quarterbacks and do a potential high-end streaming situation. I don't want that, but I want a guy that I know is going to well outperform their ADP or ranking. And I think Herbert and Jackson have better chances to do that than Allen and Mahomes.
Yeah, and quarterbacks, I think maybe more than any other position, are really dependent on the people in the draft. They really, maybe it's one of those leagues where they all draft quarterbacks early. There's a quarterback run early. They score the most points, so it's easy to sort of say, well, I want to get my good quarterback. I think Herbert's definitely going to go earlier than he did in this draft. But looking at the third round overall, it's kind of wide receiver dominant. And I got to say, if you ask best, worst pick, I would say worst pick. I don't like any of the 3 running backs that were taken in this round, but at some point they have to get drafted. I suppose this is about the point they will all get drafted. But man, I would much rather wait and take someone like Elijah Mitchell or J.K. Dobbins or even Antonio Gibson around later, which is an argument for making sure you get 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. So I don't know how you feel about that. Maybe you like some of those backs better than I do, Vinny.
Well, I don't mind James Conner there, but Cam Akers, there are a lot of warning signs here, or Darrell Henderson Jr. being a big factor. David Montgomery's got Khalil Herbert there in a new offense pushing him a little bit. So I'm not buying they're going to give a full workload to Akers, and Montgomery could lose his. But James Conner's in a really good spot here. You got Darrell Williams, you got Eno Benjamin. Those are the other guys here. There's no more Chase Edmonds. He's a pretty good receiver. I think he's underrated in that aspect. He going to have a touchdown regression for sure. He's not going to have 18 to 20 touchdowns again, but maybe in that dozen range, that could still happen here for Connor. So I just like him a little bit more because I don't think there's any real competition for him, where I think Montgomery and Akers, there are some real red flags with the way they played. Another pick I don't love here is Jalen Waddle. And I don't really like any of the Dolphins receivers. Part of it is I don't love Tua Tagovailoa, but Jalen Waddle, taking him in 10 picks after Tyreek Hill, I think it's a little bit of a reach there. Waddle was a short pass guy. A lot of that, not a lot of big impact last season. Tyreek is going to get some of those balls. Mike Gesicki is going to see some of those balls. Chase Edmonds is going to see some of those. So when you look at that, I don't like the Waddle pick there either.
Yeah, Waddle seems a bit high. Same round as Tyreek Hill's. Just a little bit jarring when you see it. But yeah, so that's kind of how the third round's going to go, or likely going to go. Like I said, I think in real drafts, maybe people jump a couple of those receivers and it balances out. But for the most part, the running backs start to get thinner. At least the kind of no questions top tier guys. There's still good running backs, of course. You look at the fourth round, here we have a pretty even split with running backs, wide receivers, throw in Kyle Pitts. And, I think that's about where Kyle Pitts is going to go. Maybe someone jumps him in the third round, but that's about right for him, early fourth. This round is pretty much where we've settled into the draft. People have their elite building blocks, and now they're just trying to get best player available at whatever position. What stood out to you in this round?
Well, yeah, quickly, I'll get into best pick, worst pick, and they were right next to each other there. Kyle Pitts is the best pick here because really the only thing missing from his resume last year was touchdowns. You look at Marcus Mariota's history, and you also have a rookie quarterback on deck with Desmond Ridder. He had some big years there with Delaney Walker. He's going to throw the tight end quite a bit. Pitts is going to score on a more regular basis this year, and he's in a similar situation to Kelsey Andrews. He's clearly his team's number one target, and it's nice where he can skip the third round and you can still get him in the fourth. I think some of that with the touchdowns and people being down on the Falcons are going to make Pitts a pretty good value here. But there's no indication from what he did last year that he's not a plus talent that's going to put up those numbers. And Antonio Gibson, the vibes are just not good. I mean, the checkdowns are going to J.D. McKissick. You have Brian Robinson Jr. being a real factor here in this offense. Gibson has durability issues. He had ball security issues last year. He's a guy I'm totally avoiding in drafts as much as possible. So those are my two standouts there on either side of the coin.
So at what point do you take Gibson, though? Like at some point he becomes good enough value, you're going to draft him.
Yeah, I think that team that we talked about, Travis Kelce, maybe take him a couple rounds later. I would go there for the value. And that's the thing is no player's undraftable. You just have to draft them in the right spot here. I just think that's a little too rich for me for Gibson. I would wait two more rounds. I do like those picks, A.J. Dillon and Josh Jacobs there in that round. A couple after where Gibson was taken. So, and I'm also not high on the guy that was taken in between those guys, Miles Sanders, but that's for the fifth round.
I don't think anyone's high on Miles Sanders, honestly. He's just such a bizarre pick. I would say this round, there's no one that really stood out to me as, that was terrible or that was good. Obviously there's risk. Probably the guy that I think is the worst pick of the round is Courtland Sutton. I just don't trust that situation, but he has a lot of upside and I understand why people like him. It's just a tough situation to really invest highly in given that team. And Russell Wilson's great and he's going to help, but at the same time, Courtland Sutton was really bad last year, and he has some injury issues, and there's other receivers that are going to command targets. So I feel like you look at some of the receivers who went after him, like Cooks, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Darnell Mooney. I like all those guys better than Courtland Sutton going into the year. But going into the next round, we had the quarterbacks go, the second tier of quarterbacks. We already kind of talked about them. Other than that, it is almost all wide receivers. And that, again, speaks to why you can wait a little bit on wide receiver, why running backs are more important to get early, which I know you've pointed out in your draft strategy column on Sporting News Fantasy repeatedly. But it's just a wide receiver run. That's what's going on here. People are trying to get the last of whatever you want to call it, second tier, third tier wide receivers. These are mostly wide receiver twos. You have several people getting their wide receiver threes, though, kind of luxuries if you get one of these guys as your wide receiver threes. What do you think of that strategy, Vinny? Try to have like the best wide receiver three, or is that just kind of foolish because there's always going to be wide receivers? They're always going to emerge.
I think the biggest question you ask about your wide receiver three, does this guy have potential to jump his draft status, at least be a middle wide receiver two, or can you get him to even be a wide receiver one? Keep in mind where Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel and Jamar Chase were going last year. They were going around this range because people were questioning a lot of things. But guess what? Those three guys were elite fantasy options among the wide receiver ones. So I say go for upside as much as possible. And the upside guys, for me, they stand out pretty quickly. Gabriel Davis, he's going to be number two, but it's number two to Stephon Diggs and a very high volume passing game there with the top quarterback being taken in fantasy. So that guy, Gabriel Davis, can build on his playoff success and be a guy that can take over some weeks with multiple touchdowns, make big plays. So he has that potential. Then you look later, I'm Ross St. Brown and Jerry Jeudy, they're okay. But you look at Darnell Mooney, the Bears are going to give him high volume here. He has good chemistry with Justin Fields. The Bears are going to be trailing a lot of games. Their defense is going to have some issues. Mooney doesn't have anyone else there. Byron Pringle's not healthy right now. So Mooney's going to eat up volume. So it's either number two with some upside on a very high volume passing offense, or a clear number one, and Mooney is that. And then Allen Robinson, we talked about Cooper Kupp being a good value here around this round last season. Well, Allen Robinson, big plans for him. Van Jefferson's recovering from a knee injury right now. They need to replace the production of Robert Woods from early last season, Odell Beckham Jr. late. Robinson's been talked about as a big touchdown scorer, and he's done that in the past with the Jaguars. So I think he's going to be a big red zone factor here. So to me, it's a triple kit of best picks here: Gabriel Davis, Darnell Mooney, and Allen Robinson.
Yeah, so I think we look at this round. This is the closest we have to a team going zero RB. The last first running back was taken in this round, the fifth round. That was Miles Sanders, which I don't think you ever want. But that team, if we look at it, went receiver, receiver, receiver. Then they went tight end. And then we got running back. So we got Miles Sanders and Chase Edmonds. Man, I would not feel good about my team going into the season with those as my starting running backs. And this goes back to something we talked about earlier. Why did that team take Jalen Waddle? When you look at the fact that that team got Chris Godwin as its number 3 receiver, and for the record, I think Chris Godwin's going to be going earlier in real drafts, closer we get to the season, and he keeps getting positive reports. But man, that team did not need Jalen Waddle there. It needed a running back, and it did not want to go into a season with Miles Sanders and Chase Edmonds. So Vinny, this speaks to sort of the potential dangers of the whole zero RB logic. And I think, true devotees of that strategy would say, yeah, we wouldn't have drafted Miles Sanders. We would have waited even longer and really loaded up on some of the, better values that could be found later, because there were better values to be found later, to be fair. But yeah, I think that shows the potential dangers of it, though. And yeah, your wide receivers are awesome. That's great in a league with 3 receivers and a flex. You can start all 4 of those guys, but if you're getting minimal points from your running backs, it only helps so much.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing to consider. And the biggest thing you take away from is don't lock into a specific strategy, because you don't know what's going to happen in your draft. You got to go with the flow here, because values are going to drop to you, and you can't pass up that value. I'm going to get 3 wide receivers no matter what. You can't do that. You have to go for who are the best upside guys at a certain point and the best returns on investment. So that's the thing. It's just don't lock into any kind of strategy. You want the best players that are going to get you the best return across the board, have a well-rounded team. That's what you're looking for here. And I get why you go the zero RB, because there's so much volatility, but I think that was also developed a few years ago when you didn't have this many valuable kind of workhorse backs. I think we've returned to that a little bit as well. So I'd like to get one of those guys early in a draft if he's available. I mentioned Aaron Jones there in that second round, even Ezekiel Elliott and Nick Chubb, the pick right after Devontae Adams. you got to think about that. And you may have gotten a really good value if that team had just said, okay, I'm going to get Stephon Diggs and running back, and I'm going to get Michael Pittman or DJ Moore or Deontay Johnson, then you figure they were in a little bit better shape. So you don't pass up on values right in front of you at other positions. And another way they could have gone, look at the way that played out with the quarterbacks there. Maybe you had taken a quarterback earlier there if you were a team. Yes, we can. Not Cam Newton, but somebody else at quarterback. So you just have to think about the best values. It doesn't matter what position you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Like I said, that strategy can work if you get the right players, of course, and you hit on some sleepers. But you just got to kind of be mindful and don't feel pressure. Sometimes I think people say, okay, I'm going to wait on running back, and then they feel pressure to take one and they reach for one when at a certain point, just wait a little longer. You've already waited this long. So going through now, we're at the, sixth round, seventh round. This is where we're just getting into best player available. We're getting into people trying to fill in their team. If they drafted a tight end, if they drafted a quarterback, we're in the anything can happen phase of your draft. It's kind of hard to analyze this. But just want to look at what happened here in the sixth round. You got a mix. You got some receivers. You got a few backs. You're starting to see a few more quarterbacks, a few more tight ends. Same with the seventh round. Pretty similar. That's how it's going to go. This is about where you're going to start seeing more quarterbacks go. There might be a quarterback run in your league that's more intense than the one that happened in this league. That often happens. But for the most part, Vinny, when you look at those two rounds, the sixth and the seventh together, and how it does just become a best player available, best value, filling in team needs, is there any general strategy you have for those early, middle rounds?
Well, I don't want to lock myself into, okay, I've got to get a tight end now. I've got
Right.
my other positions set, or I got to get a quarterback now. Don't do that. When you, again, lock into taking a particular position, you're not going to get the values that are there. So I'm trying to avoid the Waller-Kittle kind of combination. I can throw TJ Hawkinson as well there. That middle tier of tight ends, I just think the guys behind them are a bit undervalued, including Dalton Schultz there. So I will try to not force myself, okay, 3 teams that got a tight end. We got to round it out here with half of our 12-team league. I guess we're going to do that, but you don't have to do that at all. Just don't follow people with trends or just say you think you have to do this. And some teams definitely do that. When you look at drafters, there's a tendency to do that. And we talk about friends and family league versus experts. Everyone can do that at times here. So that's something you don't want to do here. And then same thing with the quarterbacks. Don't just get into that run. And we saw that here with Prescott and Hurts and Murray, and you get that tier. And then Joe Burrow and Tom Brady, that's an interesting debate right there. But I think Burrow is more likely to let down. I don't see why Brady is just being dropped really hard. I think this is a more appropriate spot for Brady to go, and I think someone's going to take him this high in your draft. So be prepared. If you want that value for Brady, you're going to have to pay a little bit more. He's Brady. He's the GOAT. And look, he doesn't have Rob Gronkowski, but that's about it. I mean, Chris Godwin's going to be back. Russell Gage and Brady have good chemistry. You got other guys at tight end now. They're going to step up. Cameron Brate, Kyle Rudolph. So this team is not going to be much different. They're going to throw a lot, and Brady's going to throw a lot. And it could be last season. He's not going to just have a second-rate season here. So don't get up in the quarterback runs. Think of the player still as individuals, whether it's tight end or quarterback in these rounds.
Yeah, I think if you look at those guys who went in early seventh, Hawkinson and Schultz, I like Schultz a lot. But ask yourself, would you rather have Hawkinson and Schultz early seventh, or would you rather have Zach Ertz mid-12th, which is where he went in this draft, Dallas Goedert mid-11th, Pat Freiermuth mid-13th. Now, are those guys going to go there in real drafts? Maybe not. Maybe they'll go higher, especially as we get closer to the season, but they're still going to be a few rounds lower. And so as much as I like Schultz, I think there's better value to be had. The question always, though, is when fantasy experts like us say, wait on quarterback or wait on tight end. Well, you got to draft someone in the 6th and 7th round. And they'll say, well, what do you want me to draft? Kadarius Toney? You want me to draft Hunter Renfrow when I already have 2 or 3 receivers? That's the problem. Running backs and wide receivers, while there are still good players and there are still promising potential breakouts, call them sleepers, call them whatever you want, they're not the most inspiring at this point in the draft, which is why a lot of people fall back on a tight end they know is going to be pretty good or a quarterback they know is going to be pretty good. I think, though, don't just keep drafting running backs. It never hurts. It never hurts to have more running backs. You'd be surprised. And there's always going to be quarterbacks. And there's always going to be tight ends. So I don't know what you think about that general strategy, Vinny, about just always looking for running backs. Like you could have taken Tony Pollard. You could have taken Rashad Penny, Kenneth Walker. A couple of those guys are going to have big years.
Yeah, you definitely have to stock up on running backs. I mean, that's the most volatile position in fantasy. There are things we think we know about it, but then injury attrition definitely comes into play there. Roles change, right? One guy is the lead early in the season and somebody's the lead in the back end of the season. We know that with Devin Singletary and Rashad Penny. So that makes now their second guys, James Cook and Ken Walker, have some value with some upside here. You also have guys that are high-end individual players that are also top handcuffs, Tony Pollard, those type of players, Ramondre Stevenson, just a bunch of those guys. We saw those guys go a little bit later. So always be looking for upside as much as possible. Don't just settle for what's there because you have to fill a position. And that tends to happen a lot here. So again, I know you have to take these positions at some point, but try to wait as long as possible. And again, don't pass up on better values at other positions. Teams tend to do that quite a bit in the draft, and just do your best. I mean, you just want guys with as much upside as possible and kind of recognize, okay, where are the values starting to be the same? Now, you look at Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, and Dak Prescott, that group that went. And then you look a little bit later, you got Matthew Stafford, Trey Lance, and Russell Wilson. What's a better investment? Probably that second group of quarterbacks. So just be patient. Maybe start targeting certain guys here and just be aware of what teams have filled out quarterback and are not likely to take a second quarterback too early. So that could allow you to wait, get some upside players at other positions, circle back to get quarterback and tight end while everyone else has filled those out.
Well, you look at this too. The last starting quarterback taken in this draft was Matthew Stafford with the 10th pick of the 8th round. I mean, that's phenomenal value. I'll take that every day. That's before we even get into the fact that Aaron Rodgers went in the 12th round as a backup quarterback. Backup quarterbacks are going to go higher in real drafts than they did in this draft. I think that's part of the simulation where they don't want to take backup quarterbacks too high. But, I mean, come on. What are we talking about here? Like, Matthew Stafford could easily rival Brady's numbers or Joe Burrow's numbers, pretty much almost anyone's numbers aside from maybe Josh Allen, a couple other the very top tier guys. So it's just silly to me to reach for a quarterback unless somehow Josh Allen falls to the end of the 3rd round. You get amazing value on him. And, the same with tight ends. It's pretty similar with tight ends. I mentioned the guys before you can get later in your draft. Those guys are serviceable starters when compared to a TJ Hawkinson. They're not going to do what Andrews and Kelsey do, which is why I like drafting those guys as high. But even Kittle and Waller, there's enough question marks with them, given the situations they're in, whether it's the new quarterback in San Francisco or the Devontae Adams being in Vegas and their injury histories. I kind of don't. I think we pretty much said this before, Vinny. I don't want to reach for them in those, the 5th round when I could get, like I said, Zach Ertz. I like Zach Ertz this year. I think Goddard's solid. He's going to get targets. There's a couple of those later round tight ends. I'm leery of Gesicki. I'm leery of Dawson Knox, but they're not bad. Like, they'll get the job done for you. At a certain point, you need high-end talent, and it's worth taking a couple of those guys who could be tier 1 players if everything breaks right. But at a certain point, too, you just got to look for value.
Yeah, and that's the point here, is that circle some guys you like. I mean, we're going to give you advice. Other experts are going to give you advice. Circle guys that you like, and your fantasy football expertise can be special as well. So think about that and just realize where the values are. Sometimes it just comes down to math. I mean, you look at Cole Kmet, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz. They have some potential there in their situations to be productive. There are some red flags with Dawson Knox and Mike Gesicki, you mentioned, Hunter Henry. So there are things that you're worried about there. So just circle where you want to attack those values and don't forget about those players. Okay, so you table tight end, but make sure you revisit those players if there's nothing else you like on the board. So I do like, again, going for as much upside as possible when you get into the double-digit rounds. I think upside in general is how I want to draft here, and not just go the old tried and true way, because tried and true can let you down because that also means old and sometimes slow. So go for some of the youth that's here. And I'm always going to look at a situation. I mentioned the David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert situation, or Miles Sanders versus Kenneth Gainwell, Singletary versus Cook, Penny. versus Ken Walker, I'm always going to go for the young guy for the value over the old guy a little bit earlier. And in this draft, it's kind of interesting that actually Walker went ahead of Penny. So some of that is going to happen as well because rookies have that hype. But you look at where Ken Gainwell and Darrell Henderson went, round 10. That's a pretty good value for guys that could end up being key starting backs, or Khalil Herbert in round 11, Rashad White in round 11. So there's a lot of guys in this grouping that can really stand out and really help you at running back. And Aaron Rodgers, going back to him, I think it's kind of ridiculous that he's dropped to the 12th round. I mean, he's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to put up numbers. Even when we had 2019, that season I mentioned with Aaron Jones, he still was a solid QB1. He was QB7, QB8, depending on the league you were in. That's still a very good return on an investment. And I could easily see Rodgers being that. Even if he drops off a little from last year, the numbers are still going to be there.
Yeah, I think when you look at this draft, round 9, it really started in round 7, but round 9, it's stark the way it's just handcuff season in there. And I do think some of those guys are going to go earlier in real drafts, especially the people who maybe draft. If you drafted Javonte Williams, you're going to reach a little bit for Melvin Gordon. You got to make sure you have him. And there's a couple other situations where you might see that. But for the most part, especially those rookies, this is where the rookie backs get drafted a little higher than maybe they should, but I still think it's worth it. I'd still rather have a rookie back over a mediocre starting tight end or a average starting quarterback when I can get Aaron Rodgers several rounds later, or whoever it is. And I think, you start seeing the rookie receivers go. This is just typical, and it's just choose your own adventure. Sky Moore here went to 7th pick of the 10th round. Maybe flip-flop him and Chase Claypool in a draft. I mean, anything could happen at this point. It's roughly the same names, just in a different order. That's the way it goes. And it's just kind of who you like and who stands out to you and who has value to you. The other thing I did want to point out, though, first defense off the board in this draft, last pick of the 10th round, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, to me, that's too early, but I'm going to vow to wait to the last 2, maybe 3 rounds to draft a defense guy. But in terms of what will likely happen in most 12-team drafts, I think that's about right, Vinny. Actually, I could see a lot of leagues where a defense goes earlier than that. But I know you're in agreement with me. Wait on defense. That was one of your draft strategy tips and the article you wrote. But at least if you're going to draft a defense first, I guess Tampa or Buffalo is about right. But do you think that's egregiously too early?
Yeah, and let's also face it. We do our best to rank defenses from year to year,
Yeah.
but did we see the Cowboys come in last year?
That's right.
With the plays that Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs made, and they were an elite fantasy defense? No, we didn't. And that's the thing, is turnovers from year to year, making those big plays, they're very volatile. You don't always get turnovers to fall in your lap that way. The Cowboys had an incredible season getting takeaways. That's not going to happen again. It's hard to duplicate. So we're not even sure who the number one defense is going to be in the end. And there's a good chance that it's not going to fall in line with Buccaneers, Bills, 49ers, Cowboys. I guarantee you that's not going to be the order of the defenses that finish. So you can wait a little bit. And the other thing that you kind of brought up, Matt, is, and this is part of my draft strategy as well, know who you're drafting. Don't just go on some expert or some camp report and say, oh, Isaiah McKenzie's looking good here. I want to get him. He's buzzing in camp. But then peel back. What is Isaiah McKenzie's role here? I mean, you have a lot of guys there that Josh Allen has thrown to, and McKenzie's been kind of a gadget player. He has never really expanded more in that role. And you look at Julio Jones. Are you just taking him because his name is Julio Jones? I mean, just look at where he is in the pecking order. If Chris Godwin's back, you have Russell Gage, you got the tight ends. Julio Jones is going to have a very limited role on the Buccaneers, and you can wait and get him a little bit later. So know what a guy is and what type of player he is. Don't take him because you've heard someone buzz about him. Know his role on his team, what his potential production can be, and that's important. I mean, at the same time, you have Tyrion Davis-Price. Okay, you know what his role could be. If Elijah Mitchell gets hurt, he could be the guy that's leading the 49ers backfield easily here. So go for someone that you know can have a high upside role. Don't just settle for, okay, we've heard about this, but some things are reality-based and some things are fantasy-based. We want the fantasy-based good stuff here.
Yeah, I think that's the key. And there's always going to be just shock, surprise breakouts, and who saw this coming? And then, that waiver wire pickup in week 1, everyone's trying to get. It happens. There's only so much you can do. Coaches tend to try to keep things as close to the vest as possible. But yeah, that's about the way a draft is going to go. Like I said, I'm going to vow to wait to the second or third to last round to draft a defense. I draft my defense based on literally just their first couple matchups, and then I'm streaming the rest of the year. So that's what I look for. Some teams that stand out that you'll probably be able to get in those situations. Cleveland has a nice opening stretch to the season. Washington has a first good couple 2 games. Philadelphia, a nice stretch to open the season. Denver, a real good stretch to open the season. So those are the defenses I'm targeting in that second to last round, but do it however you want to do it. Then, of course, the last round should be the kicker round. We see a couple kickers here going in the second to last round. Justin Tuck, sure, if you want, I guess, but there's really no point. But wrapping it up, Vinny, any overall takeaways, whether it's just from this draft or just drafting in general, you've seen in some of the analysis you've read early in this season that people should watch out for?
I think people say it all the time, and it sounds cliche now because we mention it every fantasy football season, but let the draft come to you. Don't go in with this elaborate plan. I'm going to do this, and no matter what anyone else does, no matter what player falls to me, I'm going to stick with my guns and do what I'm going to do here. Just be prepared because things happen quickly. It's an on-the-fly situation here. Be prepared to adjust. You can have a general outline or a plan of what you want to do, players you want to target, but just be prepared. There might be a situation where, okay, I feel like my buddy is going to think about taking a guy I like. I'm going to jump on him a little bit early if I like him a little bit more than everyone else. That's okay to do. So use your gut a little bit. Don't be a rankings slave, as some people would say. Just don't stick with that. Think about it in your own way. Do a little bit of your own research, and then you'll come up with a draft that suits your team. And usually when you do that and you follow the right process here, the results are going to follow.
Yeah, and I'll just say, when in doubt, draft a running back. Never go wrong drafting a running back. So that's a look at this mock draft, and I'm sure your draft will be wildly different because they all are, but that's part of the fun. So for Vinny Iyer, I'm Matt Latusky. Check out sportingnews.com/fantasy for all your preseason and in-season fantasy football needs.